Harold Rush, I wonder though, it must be, you've never probably had a kind of a negotiation for a show in your own history as an actor like this before. The show itself, let's get to it, because again, it was an Emmy Award-winning show. It was an extremely popular show. It had only 24 episodes. What is it about the show itself that is that is again dramatically different than what what WTTW originally envisioned, or even dramatically different than what we experience today?
Well, a couple of things. One was that Richard Durham, who is already an acclaimed and highly qualified writer, wrote the scripts, but he took the stories from an actual person, Buzz Palmer, who was a Chicago policeman. And so the stories were rooted in that time. In fact,
in a very literal way.
Yeah, literally. In fact, one of the episodes which exists was taken directly from what happened at that time, like Law and Order does today. They grab from the headlines, right? Well, that was being done in Bird. The episode that Okoro did with His Story of Mine, that dealt with the time period at that time of history, Black history in the schools. So a lot of the episodes dealt with what was going on at the time. It was very real. It was raw. It was real.
And the language was real as well.
Oh yeah.
Including the use of the so-called N-word, the use of there was swearing. There was a lot of risky, real raw language used and that seemed to draw the kind of attention that it got, but it seemed to draw viewers as well. How many viewers were you looking at it
Well, I know it was the highest rated.
Highest rated at its time. Yeah. Even at the time when, yet it never finished its first season of airing. What ended up, Cora Johnson, what ended up closing down this very, very popular Emmy Award-winning, groundbreaking television program?
I wanted to mention, before I get to that, remember that question. He mentioned
I'll try.
He mentioned Richard Durham and how great a writer Richard Durham was. And they offered Richard Durham $450 per episode. Now, we said, this is ridiculous. And GBH in Boston was paying the writers $2,500 per episode. So we began to demand for Richard Durham that he gets this $2,500, another fight. We wanted music rather than records. That was another fight. So it was a struggle all the way through to get the program into what Black people wanted it to be rather than how it was originally conceived.
The show was funded primarily, I believe, by a grant.
Yeah, from the Ford Foundation.
Right, yeah. And I think there was some controversy with the grant, the grant overseers or what have you, but with the show and content and what have you. But 21,000, I pulled some figures, 21,000 per segment was the average that was spent on the show, versus that was only a fifth of what was being spent on prime time.
So it was almost intended to die on the vine, as it were.
That was kind of interesting. It was very interesting.
So much was created out of so little funding, and
right.
It's such a short window of opportunity, and so much was done.
I think the audience, it goes back to something I teach as a media professor, know your audience. And I think Chicago, we just had the audience, and a part of that is the writing that you both refer to, Richard Durham's writing. It was very authentic, and so though the funding ran out and the show only had how many seasons? 24. I do believe it worked well because of the audience. It was very targeted productions.
And the productions themselves and the show itself has this very, very unusual context, right? What is that context? The protagonist, Jonah, is a Chicago policeman,
right?
And he is.
The show begins with him already dead,
which I directed the first
episode,
which is his funeral.
The
funeral was the name of
opening an entire show with the funeral.
And so it went actually backwards from that. The stories dealt with his experiences but he was already dead.
Yeah.
Also, I want to mention...
And he starts off, excuse me just for a second, but he starts off much more middle of the road. He's got an extended family.
Right.
Everyone's depending on him. He's not really politically inclined.
Right.
And as the show progresses, he gets more and more politically inclined.
Right.
There again, another radical change, not only content but in form, where today in popular television, characters don't change. They're designed to be the same every single episode.
He had a daughter that was more politically inclined than he was.
And that's part of how the consciousness begins to emerge.
Right.
Right.
Harold Rush.
One of the things that's do want to mention is that the show was, quote, canceled, and at the time it was claimed that the money had all been spent. That was not true. In fact, they ended up turning back money to the Ford Foundation. But what happened was the show did two things. One, it was highly successful. It was very raw, and from our experience, it wasn't something that WTTW and maybe some of their benefactors were expecting. And so they literally closed it down.
And
I believe it's exactly what you said. I believe there was. I don't think the overseers, the powers who be, knew how to handle the success of the show because it was so authentic. It was so gritty on some level. It was
behind
so
the scenes
it was,
as well. Behind the scenes as well, and the social context that we're talking about came into the actual studio not only at the beginning but during the show. Cora Johnson, you have so many, I'm sure, stories to relate, not that are emblematic of this kind of drama behind the scenes. There had to be a tremendous amount of controversy that entire season of those 24 episodes while you were shooting.
There were controversies all the way through. As I said, Dick said there was more drama behind the scenes and on. We fought for the music, we fought for the director, we fought for the scenes and how they would, and of course the writers. You know, that was a big fight that we get Richard Durham as a writer. Now they knew of Richard Durham's background and that he was, you know, very strong person. They really didn't want Richard Durham, but here again, we fought for that and won that fight. And of course, my being the first black director in Chicago, there were no other television.
What was that like? I mean, when you walk into the office, when you walk into the actual, when you're doing the cutting room and you're in the cutting room itself, the editing room, when you're working with the actors, what was that experience like?
Let me tell you about my first episode. I directed the first episode, and one of the directors who had been teaching me was sitting behind me, and they had opened up all of the communication throughout the station to see me fall on my face. And after I went through it, bam, bam, and you know, everything went perfectly, someone hollered over the intercom, "Harold, that was great, that was great." And I said, "Well, where did that come from?" And they said, "Well, we forgot and left the communication open." So now the person who had trained me there at TTW was sitting behind me, and I turned around to shake his hand, and he threw his hands back.
Oh, I remember that.
And
in front of the cast and
so Ed Morris,
Harold came later.
Ed Morris was sitting next to. I said, "What's wrong with him?" He said, "Don't you know?" I said, "No. What's wrong? Well, what is his problem? He trained me, took me through every morning, and you know." He said, "You just did something in 1 month that he took 15 years to do, and you did it better."
Harold Rush is an actor, though. On some of these scenes when you were shooting, you came in at some of the later episodes. Your character was, again...
I was a featured actor in one particular episode where I played a young man who was involved with gangs, and he had to make a choice between staying in the gang or becoming a musician. And so through the intervention of the lead character and some other characters, he ends up choosing to become a musician. I do want to mention something that right here at WYCC, there's a person who was actually a part of the production team at that time, got part of his beginning, Jim White.
Whom we know very well.